J'ai du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
Remember February? Seems like a lifetime ago. In late February, coronavirus had been found in 36 countries around the world. About 80,000 people were infected worldwide. Less than 3,000 people had died. On February 25th, a senior officer at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Nancy Messonnier, came right out and said what was going to happen in this country. She said in a telephone briefing with reporters that a coronavirus outbreak in this country was inevitable. It was not a matter of if, but when. And she said that, quote, disruption to everyday life might be severe, that it was time to start having tough talks within our families and our communities. The kind of tough talks she said that she herself was starting to have, including about closing schools, closing businesses, reorienting businesses to operate remotely, all the stuff that is now just our new version of regular life. That night, after that shocking briefing from that CDC official in February, I was joined on this show by Pulitzer Prize-winning science journalist Laurie Garrett, who spent 3 decades covering infectious disease outbreaks all over the world. And I asked Laurie Garrett about what we had just heard from the CDC, this sudden and suddenly dire warning from this CDC official. It was back at a time when we had a CDC that was allowed to speak to the public. But Dr. Nancy Messonnier's warning was shocking at the time. This is what Laurie Garrett had to say about that. Again, this was February. Check this out. Do you feel like the U.S. government is sort of timing those kinds of public alerts correctly? Are we past due for that sort of thing? Is it possible that it could cause an overreaction at this point?
It's long overdue. We should have been ready already, and we're not. Every single company that has more than a handful of employees should have an epidemic plan in place. Do you have a way so that your workers can work remotely and not come in, not congregate, not infect others in the workplace? Every school, every university should be looking at how to have more and more of the coursework be handled remotely. And we don't have enough protective gear stockpiled or available in inventory to supply all those personnel in the United States right now. Today, Rachel, in Geneva, they held a press briefing that went on and on and on, almost an hour and a half long. And it featured leaders of this team that had gone into China to investigate what's the status of the situation right now. And they said in no uncertain terms, everybody should do what China did. Well, now, can you imagine? We're going to shut down 100 million Americans? We're going to shut every business in America?
It's February 25th. You can see how long ago that was, in part by how close I was sitting to Laurie Garrett when we had that conversation. The idea that America would need to shift to those kinds of responses at that point was mind-blowing. But being right is one thing. Being right in advance when nobody else can see it, and it sounds like what you're saying is science fiction, that's not just a blessing, that's a national resource. That is somebody worth listening to and going back to. Joining us now is Laurie Garrett. She's a health policy analyst, Pulitzer Prize-winning science journalist. Laurie, I really appreciate you making time to come back tonight. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you.
I'm grateful I was grateful at the time. I'm grateful in retrospect for how loud you were about what was coming, even when nobody else was talking in the terms that you were talking. I have to ask you, I don't want to guide you too much. I want to ask you big picture where you think we are right now. I feel very concerned about the number of states where the case numbers and the hospitalization numbers are rising every day now. How do you feel about where we are, particularly this many months into it?
I think we're in terrible shape. I think that the reproductive rate of the epidemic, meaning the rate at which any one individual is likely to infect another individual, is well above 1, which means that it's still growing. It may not be growing at the astronomical rates that were occurring in March, but it is still growing. We haven't snuffed it out. And in certain communities, it's growing very frighteningly fast. In fact, one of the communities where you can see a graph that just suddenly in the last 7 days went is Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the president will be holding a campaign rally very soon. And that rate of growth, that sudden surge, while the absolute numbers may be small because the population isn't enormous, that level of curve is really, really indicative of an out-of-control situation. And we can see in isolated communities all over the United States a similar trend. Meanwhile, when we talked back in February, I thought that we were on the cusp of a truly global pandemic. We now not only are beyond the cusp, we're fully into it, and the Southern Hemisphere is now raging as they go into their winter. So now every single one of the sort of second-tier economies, the so-called BRICS economies, every single one of them has a giant epidemic going on right now. India, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, go down the list. Meanwhile, in Europe, while they seem to have generally declines in most of Europe, with the UK still very much struggling, the economic impact is absolutely staggering. A new report just out this week from the OECD, which is basically the financial club of the richest countries on earth, estimates that every single country in Europe and every single country in the OECD is going to see a negative GDP. So their economies are going to be going backwards. And in some of them, it's really bad. I mean, the UK, France, Italy are going to be approaching negative 15% GDP. I mean, that's Great Depression. That's staggering. We were, after 2008, we were gasping because we were down to only positive 1% growth. Well, now they're predicting for the United States negative 8.5%. To put this in perspective, Rachel, the worst case scenario pandemic plan that I saw last year said, gee, if it got really bad, we might have negative 4% GDP in the world. Well, just this week, the World Bank predicted the entire global economy, every single country on earth collectively is going into a negative 5.2% GDP. So that's 5.2% of the wealth of the planet just shrinks. And amidst all of that, we have a pandemic, and it's not just miraculously going to stop. It's not miraculously going away. And here in the United States, we just have no national policy. We have no consistent strategy across the nation. There's no guidance coming to states in any coherent way from the CDC. They've essentially been quieted.
It is Friday, the 12th of June of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, the French 77s are all available for your virtual imbibing pleasure if you happen to be imbibing in the analog world. Do not imbibe alone. You'll need each other to hold each other up if you happen to sip the second one and want a third. Careful. Steady. All right. Well, we made it to Friday. Good luck to David for his tests. He has to be put under for a little bit, but they'll send him home. They do that now, so that's fine. We'll check up on him on Monday. So thank you for dropping in here to this salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We have some gourmet dishes for your culinary pleasure as well. And though today is we like to call Friday a drinking holiday. I should assure people I don't drink like I let on here on Fridays. Most of my alcohol goes in the food. But every now and then I will, in the analog world, mix up, shaker or two of the French 77 and sip to my heart's content, which is usually about one. I'm a lightweight now. So, Trump doesn't want the statues to come down. He wants the Confederacy to exist on every military base that he can get away with. You would expect a guy who sold out America to Vlad to side with the treasonous South. You would expect it. So, he thinks that the Southern generals are a symbol of winning. Really? And here this guy got on John McCain's ass for getting captured after being shot down, bombing Vietnam. That stuff happens. That was his fault. That was John McCain's fault. Yeah, he was there because, he was part of the military, which Trump has no idea what that is. So, it's easy. It's easy for people who have never had to risk anything to risk others. Indeed. So, speaking of which, Trump has no problem getting his MAGA crowd together in a packed auditorium, as Ronna McDaniel said this is going to happen. Oh, yeah, we're going to have a packed auditorium. No one's going to wear masks either. We're going to show those libs. Yeah. Spikes in all the states. Infections are going up in all the states, just as we were told. In fact, everything that we were told in February that no one believed. No, that can't happen. And it did, as was specified at the top with Rachel's guess. Yeah, the longtime journalist, or the journalist who is a longtime virus journalist. So, reports on pandemics and the like. Had for decades. So, the economic shockwave has certainly come to pass, and it's coming to pass. Everything that we warned about 2 to 3 weeks ago is coming to pass. Of course, it's funny, the maggots are now saying, oh, it was the protests that have brought the spike. No, the spike from the protest hasn't come yet. Okay, the spike from the spike of virus infections now is from when maggots, at least in this state, decided that they were going to, violate the stay-in-place orders. Because our governor, Democratic Kate Brown, is a jackboot dictator. How dare she tell us what to do? She can't force us to be healthy. Yeah, but you know what would be nice is for at least her to force you to, keep from making us unhealthy by your actions. And those actions have now caused a spike in this state in every county. Though I will report, we here in Jackson County did come down a tick. So I often wonder what that is. I've actually researched a couple that they said were not deaths or infections from coronavirus in Josephine County, the county over. And it turns out deaths that were taken back as not being caused by coronavirus were actually underlying symptoms that they had that they were surviving with until coronavirus killed them. But they can't call it coronavirus because it was a heart attack or it was like inflammation in the lungs that was existing before, the coronavirus inflamed the lungs further and then they died. So we have GOP-controlled counties in this state fudging the numbers. So it's hard. It's hard to keep up. It's hard to know what is actually the truth. But the numbers are not being fudged to make them go up. They're being fudged to suppress them. And we just don't have enough testing. That's the other aspect. We're not testing our nursing homes yet. Not in the numbers that need to be tested. And part of the reason for that is that many of the nursing homes are in GOP-controlled counties in this state. We have an array arrayed against us, an array of lies, propaganda, hostile foreign actors working in consort with, I don't know what else to call them, traitors here in our own country, and they're the government in the White House. Oh, a little tidbit. I always like a little dirt, a little bit of scandal. Melania renegotiated her prenup when Trump won the presidency. So I'm not moving in with you until you renegotiate this prenup. And it's going to look bad. It's going to look really bad when I go back to the former Soviet Union, the bloc I come from, and get put up in the creature comforts I've become accustomed to, except in my home area like the former Soviet Union, because Vlad promised that when they said I was going to be your handler. I often wonder if that's actually true. If Melania is Trump's handler. I just wonder. Well, whether she is or not, she did renegotiate her prenup. Good for her, even though she's a birther racist bigot herself. You know, if she was just putting on airs because I'm married to him. Sorry, you don't need to do that. So she's a bigot and a birther, but I just think it's a little salty that she renegotiated that prenup. Oh, yeah. So I guess maybe I should, stick it to all these Trump bros who are so totally full of testosterone that they think they can walk all over women and that makes them desirable. Maybe they do. Maybe that is a desirable trait that's attractive to a certain subset of those who find those traits admirable. I don't. Whether being sexually excited by it or trying to exude that as if it's some sort of sexy trait. Yeah, I can walk all over women. Ah, yeah. Look at me, I'm a playboy. Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. But maybe I should stick it to him. Hey, it looks like Trump can't keep control of his women. Yeah. Yep, because that's how they look at life. They're going to dominate. Dominate the streets and dominate the sheets. Well, they certainly dominate the sheets in the streets with the pointy little caps. I had to get that in there. So, the economic shakedown, as was explained, or shakedown. It is an economic shakedown, what's happening here in this shock doctrine pandemic and civil unrest. So, with that, Trump decided, Tulsa, Oklahoma had the worst race riot in the history of the United States, and they destroyed Black Wall Street. Well, let's go there. We'll have a maggot rally there. People will love it. It'll be like a homecoming for white supremacists. Hey, look what we were able to do. We made America great then. They did, too. Trump will tout how it was, the good people. The good people, the dapper Nazis who were able to reopen Tulsa after that terrible thing happened. Yeah, that terrible thing happened because whites went in there and razed the whole place. Displaced, made homeless, displaced. This is what's funny. The history books say, 10,000 or more. Yeah, or more. A couple of tens of thousands, several tens of thousands made homeless. And they go, it could be 300 to 300 dead. We just don't know. Well, they keep finding these mass graves with, 200-300 at a pop. So the last tally from just the mass graves that they keep stumbling on is almost 5,000, 7,000 already. Some people think that it could be 15,000, 20,000 people died. Who knows? Who cares? They were just black. So Trump's going to go there and have a maggot rally as if that's a good thing. Then he's going to accept the nomination, the presumptive nomination all of a sudden I'm having a brain lock on what part of Florida, but what I do know is that there was I believe it's called the Axe Handle Massacre. A lot of race riots. So we have this meme called defund the police. What does that mean? Get rid of the police? Well, it's not get rid of the police. It's get rid of the bad cops, please. I'm sort of arguing with people that go, a lot of us level-headed people want to have a lot of cops around. And I just retort and says, a lot of level-headed people want a lot of good cops around, but not bad. I don't want idiot cops around. If somebody wants to be a civil servant, a public servant in service to the public, if you want to be that kind of police service instead of a police force, yes, we need more of those. More. But we need to get rid of the idiots. I don't understand why people want to defend the idiots. I do know why. Because they don't believe that, kicking black and brown people is a bad thing. And since they've never been black or brown and never had to suffer the indignities of prejudice and bigotry, it doesn't exist. And it's just a bunch of people with their grievances. Well, I got to listen to white grievance over and over and over. Oh, if Santa's not white, it's white genocide. If we take the Confederate generals' names off of all these bases, that's white genocide. Yeah, well, you know what? It's not white genocide. And I'll just leave you with this. Everything I learned about Benedict Arnold, I learned without the benefit of a statue in his honor. All right? We didn't put up a statue to Lee Harvey Oswald, though I probably think there are places in Texas that probably wanted to because they hated Kennedy that much. And Lee Harvey Oswald may have been a hero to them since there was already a call to assassinate the President of the United States in Texas in the days before he arrived. But for the vast majority of level-headed Americans, erecting a statue to Lee Harvey Oswald so we could remember him, a terrible thing. We don't need to do that. All right? Tear down these goddamn treasonous, or these statues of traitors, thank you, and get their names off these military bases, and let America be America again. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Majority of Americans support NFL players protesting despite what Trump says. Indeed. Moscow Mitch McConnell refuses to denounce Confederate statues at the Capitol. Well, of course he does. He's a KKK guy who's stood with the Dixie swastika many times and smiling. He loves it. And Pompeo denies knowing the State Department IG was inspecting him when he fired the watchdog, just as the watchdog was closing in. After the break, we move to the chef's table where a Turkish court jailed a U.S. consulate worker on terrorism charges. That all goes to this trying to get that cleric in Pennsylvania deported and sent back there for a show trial. And the International Criminal Court called U.S. sanctions against its workers as an unacceptable attempt to interfere with the rule of law. Hey, pal, welcome to the party. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. Now, I did put out a post. I thought it was going to go to people who are our Patreons. I thought it would go to their email. But it may only show up as just a post only to our Patreons, in which I try to explain this tax issue that Patreon now has to impose. I've changed the benefits somewhat. According to them and what I've been able to understand, a one-time merchandise, like, getting you a bumper sticker for, a benefit on a particular tier, if you donate $1, $5, $10, etc., that, each of those tiers, you can offer what's known as a benefit. Well, now, apparently everything has value. Everything. So, I've tried to make it so you're not going to get dinged by sales tax, which will begin on July 1st. So I did post up a Patreons only post, pretty much giving you a heads up. And then also I should mention that if you have not received a bumper sticker, ad block, or what would have been promised to you for becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, hit me up and I'll make sure that gets in the snail mail. A lot of stuff going on, so I apologize if things have slipped through the cracks. So thank you. Our snoozing sous chef is snoozing, so that's why he is the snoozing sous chef. We love Gunner. So we'll let him snooze and get him to work a little bit later here. So back to Patreon. If you could become a recurring Patreon, as we have recurring Patreons at the moment, and their generosity has allowed us to continue this resistance broadcasting for almost 10 years. 24/7, 365. Resistance Radio. We don't give up. Are you kidding? We're here for the long haul, because it's going to take a long haul. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, when we could just go out and do that with impunity, if you could send those funds our way, we will stretch those dollars, pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue broadcasting as the founders originally intended so many decades ago. Well, at least in terms of constitutional founders, indeed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that. I take care of at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, and then get that linked up on Twitter and Facebook and, well, a bunch of other platforms. Instagram, we're there too. Tumblr. Anyway, look for me on Twitter at Justice Putnam for the show notes and links diary, among other tidbits. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts. Yes, this is an important part. You can pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 etc. All right, let's dive into this first offering. We've just really burned up the time, but hey, it's a drinking holiday. That's right. We have the Holy Spirits with us right here in this martini glass. It's lovely. All right, Dan Desai Martin of the American Independent brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A majority of Americans, 52%, support NFL players taking a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality targeting black Americans. A Yahoo News YouGov poll released yesterday, Thursday, showed. Support for the protests has increased since 2016, when former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick first knelt at a game. At that time, just 28% considered them appropriate. Why? Because it was a black guy doing it. Did it matter that that's what the color guard did at the Lincoln Memorial? Every day they changed the color guard, took a knee to honor the dead. Then it suddenly became un-American because a black guy did it. Must be wrong. In the latest poll, 77% of Democrats support the kneeling protests, while only 20% of Republicans do. Younger Americans are more likely to support the action than older Americans. The overall support by the American public stands in sharp contrast with the viewpoints of Trump and other high-profile Republicans who have harshly criticized the protests for years. In 2017, Mike Pence walked out of a game between the Indianapolis Colts and the 49ers when some players kneeled during the anthem, but he only did that on purpose because he wanted the photo op. And they didn't think about using the military to, roust everybody out with tear gas and flashbang grenades. But they were working on it. While everyone is entitled to their opinions, I don't think it's too much to ask NFL players to respect the flag and our national anthem, Pence said at the time. That same year, Trump attacked the protests. Wouldn't you love to see one of those NFL orders? When someone disrespects our flag to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now. Out, he's fired, he's fired. Yeah, Trump would love to say that, but he never would because he's a wimp. In the wake of protests sparked by the death of George Floyd, and then I guess since people still don't know who George Floyd is, journalists feel compelled to explain that he's a black man in Minnesota who died after a white police officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes, more than 8 minutes, and the Trump administration sent out conflicting messages. There's got to be some people that don't know anything about that, and probably they're going to be on the jury. They probably will be. Pence, despite previous attacks on NFL players' peaceful protests, claimed on the 29th of May that the administration will always stand for the right of Americans to peacefully protest and let their voices be heard, except if they're black. And uppity, too. 3 days later, the Trump administration ordered federal law enforcement officers to shoot tear gas and rubber bullets at peaceful protesters across the street from the White House to clear the way so Trump could pose for a photo op in front of a church with an upside-down Bible because he's so reverent. A few days after the protesters were tear-gassed, Trump reiterated his disdain for players who knelt in protest. We should be standing up straight and tall, ideally with a salute or a hand on the heart. There are other things you can protest, but not our great American flag. No kneeling! Sorry, Don. If you had learned American civics in America rather than that crash course the FSB gives at the Kremlin for assets, dupes, and useful idiots, you would know that kneeling is a reverent thing to do. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays is brought to us by Josh Israel, also of the American Independent. Senate Majority Leader Moscow Mitch McConnell has come out against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's plan to remove all Confederate statues from the U.S. Capitol. His reasoning, states' rights. Now they like states' rights. Those stupid governors want to have protests. You can't have that. But, keeping up honoring and memorializing traitors to America, well, you'd expect someone who sold out America to Vlad to get on board with that. Moscow Mitch said every state is allowed 2 statues. They can trade them out at any time. A number of states are trading them out now, but I think that's the appropriate way to deal with the statue issue. The states make that decision, McConnell told reporters yesterday, Thursday. I think the appropriate way to deal with this issue is to stick with the tradition. Like the tradition of not allowing a black president to have any Supreme Court nominees even come to an interview, let alone a vote. packing the courts with Federalist Society extremist goons in their late 20s. You mean that tradition, Moscow Mitch? How about the tradition of getting a Russian oligarch mobster pumping in tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in your state of Kentucky because of states' rights, and you and your transportation secretary commerce wife mash that with some China money? You mean that tradition, Mitch? You're going to adhere to that tradition? Pelosi called on Wednesday for the removal of 11 statues of Confederate figures from the Capitol's Statuary Hall. Monuments to men who advocated cruelty and barbarism to achieve such a plainly racist end are a grotesque affront to these ideals, she wrote in a letter to colleagues. Their statues pay homage to hate, not heritage. They must be removed. Of course, McConnell says, well, hate is our heritage. What are you talking about, Nancy? Pelosi noted that the figures depicted included Confederate States of America President Jefferson Davis and Vice President Alexander Stephens, both of whom, quote, were charged with treason against the United States, end quote. Around the country, Confederate monuments and other racist statues are being removed from public display as the nation grapples with systemic racism and the killing of George Floyd and amid mass protests against police violence. Statues have been removed or ordered down in recent days in places from Mobile, Alabama, to Alexandria, Virginia, to Jacksonville, Florida. Many Americans continue to believe or push the myth that the Civil War was fought over states' rights. Republicans have asserted this in the past. In April, for instance, an official with the Wisconsin Republican Party claimed the Confederacy was more about states' rights than slavery. Well, PolitiFact ranked that claim and others like it as a pants-on-fire lie. All you have to do is go to the rebel Constitution, where it's all about making sure that they save slavery. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his top deputy are rejecting allegations that the State Department's independent watchdog was fired for investigating impropriety by Pompeo and his wife, because if he doesn't know it, then it's okay to get rid of the IG. In separate letters sent to Congress late Thursday, that was yesterday, Pompeo and Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun denied suggestions that Pompeo was aware of any such probe by ousted Inspector General Stephen Linick or his office. Pompeo also denied that Linick was removed for no cause, accusing him of, quote, strange and erratic behavior. You know, going after Pompeo. That's strange and erratic. And failing to do his job over many months. Well, what Pompeo wanted him to do was rubber stamp everything that Trump wanted, and the Inspector General is to investigate graft, corruption, fraud, you know, all the things that Trump markets in. And apparently Pompeo, too. Pompeo also said Undersecretary of State for Management Brian Bulatto was willing to testify to the House Foreign Affairs Committee about the circumstances of Linick's ouster on June 22nd or June 23rd. They haven't decided yet because, you know, they don't really care. And at the last minute, they'll say he won't be able to testify anyway. I need an inspector general working every day to improve State Department operations and efficiency, Pompeo wrote in one letter to committee chairman Representative Eliot Engel. Mr. Linick was not that person. Pompeo also took a political shot at Engel, who was facing a difficult Democratic primary in his home district. I hear you've been busy in your district, so let me get you up to speed on what's happening in your committee, Pompeo wrote. What a little smartass. With a footnote referring to a news reporter that said Engel is fighting for his political survival. All right, mobsters do this kind of stuff. And obviously we have a mob government. Engel responded by saying he was puzzled why Pompeo's letter included so many errors. But I'm glad that the department is moving toward what the committees requested weeks ago, allowing Mr. Bellato to speak on the record about the firing of Inspector General Linick, Engel wrote back. He added, "We look forward to hearing from Mr. Bellato and all the other witnesses involved in this fiasco." Pompeo has said Trump fired Linick at his recommendation, and Democrats have suggested his ouster was personally and politically motivated. Pompeo adamantly denied that and called Engel's suggestion that he wanted Linick fired to cover up impropriety a nasty insinuation aimed at misleading the American people. Well, how come your wife gets a security detail and you take her along and you stay at the Ritz on the taxpayer dime? You know, that's supposed to be inspected, you little mobster, you little capo. The letters were sent to Engel and obtained by the AP a day after congressional Democrats released a transcript of an interview with Linick last week and demanded answers to the allegations he made. The letters, 2 from Pompeo and 1 from Began, were accompanied by a 4-page compilation of numerous Linick quotes from the transcript entitled 3 Things Democrats Won't Tell You About Linick's Testimony, and annotated with refutations of specific points. Among other things, Linick testified that he had sought information from Began, Bellato, and several other top Pompeo aides about allegations that Pompeo and his wife improperly used government staff to run personal errands, although it did not say he knew that Pompeo had been alerted to the probe. Several lawmakers, including Engel, concluded it would have been difficult to believe that he had not been. In his letter to Engel, however, Began said neither he nor anyone else relayed any information about what he termed Linick's purported request to Pompeo. Now, Pompeo has said he was aware that Linick had opened a review of last year's $8 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, which Pompeo had circumvented congressional objections to approve. Linick testified that Bellato and legal advisor Merrick String had tried to discourage him from investigating the sale, saying it was an inappropriate review of policy and not policy implementation. Pompeo, Bellato, and others have said Linick was dismissed in part because of inappropriate actions, but also because of the alleged leak of one of his office's reports into accusations of political reprisals by Trump appointees against career State Department officials. Linick denied his office was responsible for the leak. He said an investigation into the alleged leak by the Defense Department Inspector General cleared him and his office. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a love letter to TV and radio. Director Andrew Patterson's debut, The Vast of Night, harkens back to an earlier era. Designed to look like an episode of the cult classic The Twilight Zone, complete with a Rod Serling sound-alike. Even more so, it's a nod to the medium that preceded TV, radio, in the era when it was truly the lifeblood of the community, especially in small towns. Set in 1950s New Mexico, in a fictional place that's hinted to be not far from top-secret government goings-on, the movie tells the story of two high schoolers, Everett, a local radio announcer operator as they used to be called, and Faye, a junior telephone switchboard operator. She begins hearing a strange noise that is interfering with both the radio broadcasts and telephone calls. Everett, seeking explanations from listeners, airs a caller who mentions that he had heard that sound years before and suggests that it involves a government project out in the desert. Anyone with the vaguest notion of pop culture will quickly pick up on where this one is headed, despite its modest budget, much of which is saved for an impressive visual grand finale. While the plot isn't very original, the way that it is shot and presented is refreshing. Simply put, Patterson makes the most of what he has. With no star actors, he manages to make something as seemingly mundane as radio interference to build an atmosphere of suspense and intrigue. The key here is moderation. Even the nods to the 50s, like the hairdos, the cat's eyeglasses, and tail-fin cards, are subtle enough to work without ever feeling over the top. The Vast of Night is a wonderful debut that could well be a surprise hit in the COVID summer movie season. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
It's more than a vote.
I'm Floyd Patterson II, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with Bill Newman.
More Than a Vote is the name of the organization, just founded by National Basketball Association superstar LeBron James and other prominent black athletes and entertainers. The purpose of More Than a Vote is to protect African American voting rights, to inspire African Americans to register and to vote, and to combat voter suppression, which we should note is rampant in the United States today and pernicious and potentially fatal to democracy. More Than a Vote is a 501c4 organization, so generally it can't back any specific candidate. But potentially on a large scale, it can teach people how to fight back when governments, state and local government officials, and private organizations try to prevent people from voting. The murder of George Floyd motivated LeBron James and his cohorts to undertake this effort. As Phoenix Mercury guard Skylar Diggins Smith said, "I'm sick of seeing unarmed black men killed by the police. I want to put some action behind the frustration, the anger, and the helplessness I've been feeling." And LeBron James said, "It's time for us to make a difference." Indeed, helping to secure the right to vote, theoretically guaranteed by the United States Constitution, could make an enormous difference. That would be a victory worth savoring.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union, because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. That was the day that 18,000 workers in Chicago's stockyards went out on strike. Work in the stockyards was often brutal and dangerous. Thousands of workers toiled in the yards, many of them immigrants from Eastern Europe. They worked butchering and processing the hogs and cattle raised in the American West into meat for distribution by rail to consumers across the country. The industry gave Chicago the nickname Hog Butcher for the World. In 1904, the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union organized a strike. The main demand was increased wages. The meatpacking companies were able to get scabs to cross the picket lines and act as strikebreakers. Most were African Americans and European immigrants. Many of these workers had not been organized by the union, which was dominated by the skilled German and Irish packing house workers. Novelist Upton Sinclair visited the stockyards during the strike to research conditions faced by the workers. In his famous novel, The Jungle, Sinclair gave a fictionalized account that captured the devastating impact of the scabs on the strike. He wrote, quote, "Such were the stockyards during the strike, while the unions watched in sullen despair, and the country clamored like a greedy child for its food, and the packers went grimly on their way. Each day they added new workers, and could be more stern with the old ones, could put them on piecework, and dismiss them if they did not keep pace." It was not until the 1930s, when the stockyard unions took seriously the task of organizing across race, ethnic, and skill lines, that they finally won a contract and gained the rights of union recognition. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 63 degrees, expecting a high of only about 60 to 65 degrees. Cloudy early, then off and on. Rain showers for the afternoon. Winds light and variable. Expecting about 1/10 of an inch of rain today, and looks like almost 1/4 of an inch between today and tonight. Overcast with rain showers at times tonight. Overnight lows in the low 50s. Winds light and variable. Tomorrow, Saturday, we should have a high in the mid-60s. Cloudy skies. A slight chance of a rain shower, and winds will remain light and variable. I have not been drinking the French 77s yet. Now, the coronavirus cases that have confirmed in Jackson County have now gone down 1, and they stand at 76 with none deceased, but that's only because we haven't been testing for that. Grass pollen remains very high right outside the window of the mothership. The air quality index for the Southern Oregon region is good at 27 parts per million, and the daytime UV index, in spite of the rain, is very high at 9. So take care, even though you have a cloud cover. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.01 inches. Visibility is down to 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. We have to hurry. Yes, indeed. Everybody has coronavirus, so I'm not going to mention it for each one. London is 65 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 68 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 77 and sunny. Kyiv is 91 and fair. Kabul is 75 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 75 with a persistent rain. Sydney, Australia is 57 with a persistent fog. San Francisco, California is 56, mostly cloudy. And New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Darren Butler and Ali Kukokaman of Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Turkish court jailed a local employee of the U.S. consulate in Istanbul for nearly 9 years yesterday, Thursday, for aiding a terrorist organization, a ruling the U.S. said would undermine the trust underpinning bilateral relations. Metin Topuz's trial has been a major source of tension between the two NATO allies, which are also at odds over Ankara's purchase of Russian missile defense systems and U.S. support for Kurdish fighters in northeast Syria. Topuz, a translator for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration at the consulate in Istanbul, because there's a lot of heroin that comes through there, was sentenced to 8 years and 9 months for aiding a network Turkey blames for the 2016 coup attempt that state-owned Anadolu agency said. He has been in jail for 2.5 years already while on trial, accused initially of espionage and trying to overthrow the government. If you vote against this guy, you will suffer. A prosecutor said in March he should be acquitted on those charges and instead face up to 15 years in prison for membership of a terrorist organization. In a 78-page indictment that included telephone calls, text messages, and closed-circuit TV images, Topuz was accused of links to two officials who led a 2013 corruption investigation and were later found to be members of a network of U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen, blamed by Ankara for the abortive 2016 coup. Get investigated for corruption? You're trying to overthrow the government. Now, Gulen has lived in self-imposed exile in Pennsylvania since 1999 and has denied any involvement in the coup attempt, but Trump's been using him as leverage, and he wants to deport his ass anyway.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The ICC said yesterday, Thursday, Trump's authorization of economic and travel sanctions against ICC employees amounted to threats and coercion and were an unacceptable attempt to interfere with the rule of law. Earlier in the day, Trump had authorized sanctions against ICC employees involved in an investigation into whether U.S. forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan. The International Court said it stood by its staff and officials and described U.S. sanctions as being the latest in a series of unprecedented attacks on the court. Well, that's because mobsters don't like judges. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.